Good morning. I see still people walking into the room, but I think we should start, otherwise we get too late behind schedule. Welcome everybody. My name is Karel Vietsch. I'm the Secretary General of TERENA, and it's my pleasure to be chairing this session this morning. Let me briefly explain to you what this session is about. Of course, the TERENA conferences are mostly about Europe, but there are other places in the world as well where a lot is happening in research networking. And gradually over the years, really four geographic areas, four continents in the world have developed that are very strong in research networking. Europe, North America, the Asia-Pacific region, and Latin America. And yesterday we had a session where we heard some stories about developments in those other continents. The session today will be about the connectivity between those continents. And also there are revolutionary changes. We go to new forms of connectivity between the continents, and the three presentations in this session are about those developments. In the first presentation, we will hear about the GLIF, which is all about lambdas within continents and between continents forming a global infrastructure. Then we will hear about GLORIAD, which is a specific project to build a very high capacity ring around the world. And how far can you go? No farther than a whole ring around the world, I guess. And then finally, in the third presentation, Di Davis will tell us how Dante will be responding to those developments. So that sets the scene for the presentations. Let me introduce our first speaker. I've known Kees Neggers for a long time, maybe 20 years now. We first met in a very large effort to set up the SURF Foundation and the SURFnet in the Netherlands, when I was a little bit involved from the side of the Dutch government, and he was involved as a technical person, at that time working at the computer center of the University of Nijmegen. He and his comrade in arms, Boudewijn Nederkorn, came back again when this became a standing organization, and they became the joint managing directors of SURFnet. And they still hold those positions. Kees in particular has always had a portfolio in the international collaborations. He has had a number of functions. He has been on the board of RARE and on the board of TERENA, been involved in EBON, has been a trustee of the Internet Society. He still is, I think, the president of the RIPE NCC, and many, many other functions. And right now he is one of the leaders, I would say, of this initiative called the GLIF, and that's what he's going to tell us about now. Kees.
One.
Okay. Is it okay now? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Karel, for the introduction, and I'm glad to be here again. I missed 2 TERENA conferences, which I regretted, and I'm back. I'm glad to be back now. Yes, I will speak about the Glyph Initiative, and I would rather say it the Glyph Challenge now. It's all about linking the world with light. As you saw the previous slide, which I borrowed from George McLaughlin, the world has a lot of light, but to bring more light to the researchers and the educational community is what we are working on. A couple of years ago, we realized that it was no longer sufficient to connect researchers to the internet. They have to be connected to each other and to resources on the internet, and in a much more direct way. And the GLIF community was the community of the initial believers that this should be done, and they work together. And their paradigm is that optical networks, not computers, is the heart of the new network. And as we saw yesterday in the presentation from Ed Seidel, give us the bandwidth is the question of the researcher, and this is exactly what we try to do with the Glyph Initiative. Many of you have seen this picture before. This triggered the thinking inside SurfNet about what to do next. In 2001, we built our SurfNet 5 network with 10 gigabit lambdas. And since the beginning of SurfNet 20 years ago, we had an exponential growth of our network capacity. And we assumed that it would continue, that the demand would be there, but we were afraid that by just continuing the network as we did of the demanding users, and we had a number of them in the Netherlands. Well known are the VLBI people. This is their tape room where they ship tapes from the different telescopes to do the correlation. And of course, they really wanted to do this online. And that would be a load on our network that really would outpass whatever we had. And we thought whatever we could build based with routers alone. At that time already, the Netherlands was working on a new telescope. There's a very big radio telescope in the Netherlands. And they wanted to have a next generation telescope built out of phased arrays. And these phased arrays, which is in fact also a sensor network, and they are using it for that purpose as well. It's now a project that is funded and it's being implemented. They will collecting 20 terabits per second. Of course, no internet can support that. So here you see that lambdas are moving inside the instruments. So they have a blue gene computer in Groningen, which is receiving these 20 terabits, is doing a lot of calculations with it, fast Fourier transforms, whatever, taking away the noise from GSM telephones, etc. And then the data that is of interest to the astronomers, which is still gigabits per second per astronomer, has to go around the world. And again, we didn't believe that our internet would be able to do that as a routed network, at least definitely not in an economically sound way. There are even bigger projects on the drawing table. As I said, we had to deal with terabits. Australia is thinking way ahead, and they are thinking about petabits to collect via an instrument and process it. So again, no way to do this with a routed internet, of course. And this is the slide I showed in 2002 at the Nordinet conference. We really believed that based off these analyses that we had to build a different type of network. Bigger routers, bigger pipes would not be the solution for the demand of our community. And we really how to use the lambdas in a more direct way to serve our users. Here you see the growth of the routed traffic of SurfNet. And as you see, this is no longer exponential. This is now a linear growth. And if you look from July 2001 until now, it is roughly 8 times as big as it was at that time. That's still enormous growth, and you have to plan for that as well to accommodate it. But it's not the linear growth that we saw in the past. But at the same time, we did expect the exponential growth we saw in the past. We still expect that exponential growth if you give the researchers the right bandwidth. Exactly as Ed Seidel said yesterday. Why is my network not used? Because it's not fast enough. It's exactly true. And the total amount of terabytes per month that we are now dealing in the layer 3 network is around 1600 terabytes per month, which is roughly 5 gigabits per second. This is the average load on our network. That's exactly the same load that this single user produces on the network. And this is a tile display. We showed it at Pittsburgh at the supercomputing conference. Everybody can buy this display for 20,000 euros. It's just 16 PCs and displays. As Dai showed this morning, you saw a peak of about 4 gigabits per second. These are the loads that individual users can put on your routed network. So you really have to do something to sustain a congestion-free network that serves all your users. Dai showed you a number of nice pictures about the costs of equipment. This is also what we realized at that time. Routing is 10 times more expensive than switching, and switching is 10 times more expensive than layer 1, so layer 2 switching compared to layer 1 switching. So we really decided we have to give each packet in the network the service it needs, but no more. This is the only economical way to deal with the load on our network. And so we ended up very rapidly with the notion of hybrid networking. We wanted to have the next SurfNet network to be IP plus Lambdas and not just IP. And this was not because we wanted to replace the IP by a switched network. And as Dai showed this morning, a congestion-free switched network is not that easy to build. So this is not the intention at all. We want to protect the routed network for those users who need it in an economical way, and then give light pass to the few heavy usages. And the light passes, of course, are created on top of the Lambdas. The Lambdas are just the raw wavelengths we get either out of our DWDM equipment or from the carriers. And with some additional equipment, which is rather inexpensive at the edge, you can then provide layer 1 and layer 2 end-to-end light pass between any point on the world, in fact. And we demonstrated that quite nicely already. And you can have really point-to-point 1 or 10 gigabits per second connections. And they have no jitter. They have no constraints on framing, routing, and transport protocols. Also an interesting aspect for a number of new applications. The existing TCP protocol is not suited for high-speed, long-distance connections. And as we saw with LOFAR and the square kilometer array, and also with the LHC, of course, they are becoming part of the scientific instrument. An instrument is no longer at one spot. It's distributed, and you need Lambdas and high-speed data transports between them. And an interesting thing is, we already learned in the deployment of our new network, the creation of optical private networks is very interesting. And currently, the biggest demand for our light passes in the Netherlands is not the researchers which were at the when we designed the network, the ones we focused on. It's in fact universities and schools with different locations making really wide area, local area networks with one single firewall and a number of central services in a very economical way based on the light passes. So when we realized this paradigm shift was coming, and we realized that it was not just a SurfNet problem, it was a global issue, we also wanted to use global forces to tackle the issue. And that's why we ordered in 2001 already the 2.5 gigabits Lambda from Netherlight to Starlight to start experimenting in a global environment in the hope that we would have a global harmonization of the ways forward so that we would have an interworking infrastructure. And so when we ordered this Lambda and it became real, immediately people got interested, and the first brainstorming was in fact at the TERENA conference in Turkey. And we agreed, let's start workshops for those interested, with real interest in these Lambdas, who want to play with them or who want to install them themselves. And the first Lambda workshop was organized in September by TERENA in Amsterdam. And the second workshop was 1 year later, combined to iGrid 2002, which was hosted by the Science Park in Amsterdam. And here you see the group of people, a number of them are here as well, of course, who attended the second Lambda workshop. Already in 2002, although we only ordered a 2.5 gigabit link, we already had 2 10 gigabit links in operation. One was a donation from the IEAF, a TICO donation, and the other one was donated by Level 3 for the iGrid conference. Both of these links were engineered in a couple of weeks. So it turned out to be trivial at that time to have 10 gigabit cross-Atlantic connections. And for the first time, this iGrid event had more bandwidth than the users could use. And they all learned that their applications were wrong for doing high-speed things over long distances. And this was very useful, and at supercomputing later in 2002, many of them already had improved their situations and were able to do wide area tests that had much better results already. So there was a real momentum going on, and in the third workshop, which was organized next to the Nordinet conference, the people attending decided this has to be not just institutionalized, but it has to be a real ongoing thing, and we need to have a nice name for it. And at that meeting in Reykjavik, the name GLIF was agreed upon as the Global Lambda Integrated Facility. And the term facility was deliberately chosen because GLIF didn't want to be a network. It didn't want to have only network people on board. It also wanted to have middleware and application people on board. It wanted to integrate these things, and that's why the name Global Lambda Integrated Facility was born. And these were the founding members at the Reykjavik meeting in the National Library in Reykjavik. So after Reykjavik, GLIF was a collaborative initiative among worldwide collaborators, and they included NRANs, all type of consortia related to projects or elsewhere, and institutions as well. We really wanted to involve the users of the Lambdas as much as the providers of the Lambdas. And as such, GLIF was clearly positioned on the demand side of the market. These were really the people who wanted to use the network, and as such, I consider a research network on the demand side of the industry side as well, being not-for-profits and working for closed user groups. So GLIF is in fact a world-scale Lambda-based laboratory to facilitate the use of applications and middleware around these Lambdas, which all participants at that time already agreed were necessary to cope with the future demands. And at that meeting also it was agreed to use .is, where the word GLIF was still available, as the website for GLIF, and that website is still the home of the GLIF community. We also created working groups at that meeting. We have 4 of them. By far the most active is the technical issues one, where the coordination and harmonization takes place of building this global grid infrastructure. I will not go into this detail. You can go to the website for more information or approach people here around these activities. The 4th annual workshop again was attached to another meeting. In this case it was the UK All Hands e-Science meeting in Nottingham last year, and that meeting was organized by Kees de Laat and Maxine Brown, and they were very active in organizing previous ones as well. And here you see Maxine Brown with Robin Hood, and I like this picture because what we do in fact is bring the Lambdas to the poor researchers, and this is in fact one of the aims that GLIF is working for. A much larger group already, as you see. Nearly everybody at that time was convinced that hybrid networking was the way forward, and everybody was interested in learning more about it and being part of it. And also after GLIF, after Nottingham, it was agreed that GLIF should be an open community. Everybody is welcome who's interested in Lambdas, although, as I said earlier, GLIF is positioned on the demand side. The industry side, the provider side, is welcome, but the demand side is the dominating factor in the GLIF. And we also agreed not to be a threat to any existing organization. We didn't want to be a new organization. We just wanted to facilitate these new things. And therefore, we clearly decided we don't have members, we only have participants. Everybody interested can participate. And as such, we want to glue together networks and resources of all the participants. And also, in Nottingham, it was agreed that TERENA would serve as the secretariat of GLIF. And so we really wanted to have GLIF as a lightweight organization with a lightweight governance structure. At the same time, of course, it should be heavy in the number of participants. That's not a problem. This map you have seen before. It's still the December 2004 map, although it's not really correct. It was the planned December 2004 map. It's not fully realized. Maxine and Bob Patterson are working on a new one, which should be ready before iGrid, which has already much more lambdas than you see here. But the interesting thing is what you see right away if you look at this map, and this is also what Dai mentioned this morning. If you start doing this circuit type things, you will have hub and spoke models. And you see that there are hub and spokes emerging on the globe. And of course, it's very important to do that correctly and in a economically sound way to not stagnate the developments. It's important to realize, and GLIF is doing this from the beginning, that the infrastructure on the global scale is always multi-domain. There's no such a thing as a global network managed and operated by a single global entity. It's always the connection of different networks that need to interwork. And also, it's very important to realize that what starts in a research community, as soon as it becomes successful, and Lambda networking seems to be the mainstream now in research networking, it will move to the commercial networks. And it's very important to build in steps so that you can migrate to that commercial use as well. In the end, we all profit from that. It will give us access to a larger community and maybe also to cheaper services if the commercial world start to provide these services as well. So for all these reasons, open GLIF optical exchanges will be key to facilitate the further evolution, not only for the scaling of the GLIF infrastructure itself, but to interwork with the commercial domain and to provide a smooth migration from research to the market, which in fact is one of the main reasons governments are sponsoring research networking, and we should remember that. One of the open GLIF optical exchanges that, of course, pioneered this is the Netherlight in Amsterdam. It started operation when the first Lambda came in January 2002. It was built and still operated by SurfNet, but we really would like to have this Netherlight seen as owned by the users of the Netherlight and make it a really joint effort that is open, neutral, and can facilitate the future steps that I just mentioned. The current configuration is a Nortel HDXC, which has a 640G non-blocking full duplex cross-connect capability. For the time being, that is more than enough to deal with the demand, and of course this is still scalable. And then, same as MANLAN, we have Nortel OME and Cisco 15454 equipment at the edge to provide the interfaces and the granularity of the services of our users. This is the configuration of the third quarter of 2005, I expect. It's likely that there will be more links coming in as well. And my guess is that by iGrid 2005 in September, we will have more than 100 gigabits connected via Netherlight. And not only this is links going to just an end user, no, many of these will go to hybrid networks, which is now, of course, a growing phenomenon. The SurfNet 6 network will be fully hybrid. So the users in the Netherlands will all be able to reach via our SurfNet 6 network all the links connected to Netherlight. And I hope that the GEAN2 hybrid network will be able to provide similar services to all the users of GEAN2 in Europe. This is a list of optical exchanges that I'm aware of. Not all of them are in the same state of maturity, but all the cities and places mentioned here either operate or plan to operate optical exchanges. And as you see, there are lots already in Europe, in North America, in Asia, and of course the Atlantic wave is even going already to Sao Paulo, and South America is connected in that way as well. So really this is a fast-growing activity. Of course, there are growing pains. Nothing is settled in this world. We have to find it out ourselves, and that's why GLIF exists and GLIF cooperates. And in Nottingham we agreed that in particular the tech working group would work on current best practice documents, documented what we know, in particular with respect to interoperability and interconnectivity, to deal with the multi-domain aspects, of course, and multi-vendor aspects, and also to define what open optical exchanges are. They will be there in many different shapes. So Netherlight is fully open. It allows even commercial connections so that the acceptable user policy restricted world can talk to everybody else. ManLAN, as far as I understand, will only be open for the research and education community. This is of course still a large group and it's very useful, but they will be different. And all these things need to be easily available. So we need a register of GLIF resources, and we agreed to make one. So in that repository there will be all the lambdas, all the exchanges with all their attributes, and so it would be easy for everyone to see what's available, under what conditions, and it will also allow people who want to make nice graphical representations out their part they are interested in to use that repository. And this is one of the things we hope to progress before the iGrid meeting in September. The next Lambda workshop will be attached to this iGrid meeting, which will take place in the new building of Larry Smarr in San Diego. And already for 2006 we agreed on Japan as the place for the next GLIF meeting. As I said earlier, there are a number of challenges ahead of us. One of the challenges, of course, is to bring the research and piloting we are doing to the users and to the market. This is one of the, major side effects of research networking. We should realize this. This is one of the reasons governments are still sponsoring us, so we should always remember this. The connectivity challenge is, of course, a very serious one. Reaching out to the users is, of course, what is the ultimate goal. We've not done that nicely so far, because researchers had to come to the GLIF infrastructure rather than that the GLIF infrastructure came to the users. And the challenge, of course, is to bring the lambdas to the desktops, or the light passes, to the desktops of the researchers and to their instruments, creating this grid of resources. And of course, this really means that we have to bring dark fiber to the remote instruments, like the telescopes, and hybrid networking functionality into the lens of the campuses. This will be a major, of course, reorganization of many of the campuses. And we are currently working with TERENA to try to make a document to show what should be done to be ready for the hybrid world on campuses. The middleware, of course, is the glue that brings the network available for the applications and the researchers. And ubiquitous end-to-end light path connectivity over a multi-domain infrastructure is not a simple thing. And a lot of middleware needs to be developed for this. We also need to harmonize existing protocols. At the layer 1 level, we are using ITU recommendations. But as we all know from the past, ITU recommendations come in many flavors, and you can pick and choose out of them. It's very important that the research community picks the same options and work with that. And this is exactly what GLIF is doing and recommends. And there will be new protocols to take advantage of the new facilities. And again, here we are the place where these new things are born and tested and then mature to the commercial available world. And of course, these AAA features needs to be user-friendly, and that's why users should be in the loop from day one as well. And that's the only way we believe we can pave the way to a ubiquitous and scalable service grid. But in the end, of course, it's all about the applications. A network is just a facilitator. It's not a goal in itself. And we really need to stimulate the development of the new applications that explore the hybrid functionality. A lot of potential users are not aware what is ahead of us, what is coming available. And to give them early warnings, there are more opportunities is very important, so they will prepare to use them. And so working closely with the GLIF users on best practices to overcome the connectivity and middleware challenges is one of the things we try to do, and that's why we are here in a conference where we have both the providers, the network, research network providers and the users together. And we need to explain the opportunities to the researchers. And then, as Ed Seidel yesterday said, they will use the bandwidth. They have lots of things we are not aware of that will be possible on the new network. And iGrid 2005, of course, will be the place where we hope to demonstrate a number of these new usage types and also to progress a lot of the harmonization activities in the GLIF working groups. This is the end of my presentation, Karel. Thank you all.
So, do we have any questions from the audience? Who can we give the floor? Yes, over there in the middle.
Hans Döbeling from Dante. Kees, could you elaborate on the commercial model of Netherlight? Is it free to use? For how long would it be free to use, or do you become a member? How does it work?
Okay, I'm glad you're interested in this, Hans. Is it working? Yeah. At the moment, SurfNet builds, operates, and pays the Netherlight. So it's free for those who bring in Lambdas. And we still work according to that model, but we really want to agree with all the users what would be the best way to make Netherlight an independent, neutral thing that can be governed by all its users in a way that it facilitates the connectivity and other services we want to provide in the exchange points. And we are completely open. So Netherlight should not be considered part of SurfNet anymore. We still facilitate it. We can afford that at this level, but of course if it grows, it needs to be supported by all of the users, and we need to find a commercial model around that. In the same way we did that in the past with the Amsterdam Internet Exchange and other internet exchanges around the world. And the reason we are open for commercials is that we really see already a need in the Netherlands for users that we are not allowed to serve as SurfNet, that are interested in taking part in virtual laboratories environments. And by just bringing in Lambdas to a neutral exchange point, we can all talk together. And they don't need to make their new private optical networks. And we have a smooth migration to, in fact, a world that combines both industry and commercial environments and research environments in a way that scales. And is exactly the same model as the internet. At the moment, we are planning to collect all those interested in that evolution to set up a governance structure and go forward. Is that... Would you care to have a time scale on how long?
Would you dare to give a time scale to that process?
Well, any time now. So, in fact,
no, I meant actually for how long you will subsidize the Netherlight, and when will it be commercial? That's
okay. All the links you saw on my picture at the moment have a free connection to Netherlight, and I think this third quarter all the connections are still that way, because we have not collected the users to see how we would continue. And but we will do that soon, after the summer, I think. Because we are now building the SurfNet 6 infrastructure, as you know. And we really want to separate SurfNet 6 and Netherlight and make these things independent. But of course, there's no free ride indefinitely. That would not scale. And but we really believe the model will be simple and affordable for everybody, because there's so much economy of scale in joining forces there.
Any other questions? Yes, behind you there.
Hi, I'm Vasilis from NRNPC and NTUA. Kees, and from your presentation, this is something like a clearinghouse for power users. Do you foresee that? I'm sure you do. I mean, do you foresee that to be also a clearinghouse, a clearing place for hybrid providers, or for? In this case, do you have any? I mean, do you have any working group working on the business model of how to strike bilateral commercial deals amongst those entities, or is it for the time being just a power user to power user clearinghouse?
Well, the current implementation is that Lambdas are provided via a NOC. You have to send an email to the NOC and they will set up the Lambda. We are working with Bill Centeno, UCLP, but also Nortel is working on software that will allow users to set up their LightPass directly. And then, of course, you run into the trouble, as Dai mentioned this morning, that there may not be a LightPass available for the destination you are looking for, and we have to look into that type of problems as well. There, you need a repository to find information, what's available, who's allowed to use it under what conditions, and here the AAA middleware, hopefully user-friendly, will come in to assist. So, at the moment, we are not charging for the use of the LightPass. Our users have access to it, but there's not an unlimited supply, so there is prioritization needed, and we see that currently anytime there's a big conference where people want to show things, that there is congestion and you need to make timetables and give people slots during the day. There is no business model in a sense that we have set up a business around this, and we are not planning to do so. Because, as I just explained to Hans, Netherlight will have to be owned by its users in the end. That's the only way neutral exchange points can work, and it is the collection of the users that we will ask to agree on a business plan for Netherlight in the future. We are not, and for SurfNet 6, the model is very simple. We have an overcapacity of LightPass initially. They will be free to use for any user that is connected to SurfNet in the Netherlands, but that's inside the SurfNet 6 cloud, of course, until the end of next year. And then we are going to introduce a charging model, and that will be based on the number of LightPasses people use, of course. So everybody is warned, you're free to use the LightPass, but be aware, if you want to continue to use them in 2007, you may pay a slightly higher fee than the people who use less LightPasses. And as in the Xeon 2 model, our LightPasses will be available at marginal costs. So the initial investment is in fact paid by the current users, and the LightPasses are stimulated because we see it really as the only way to protect the routed network, to allow big users to go to their dedicated LightPass. We should make it as easy as possible. And our funding model, charging model supports that. And for Netherlight, as I said, I'm not going to dictate anything. It's up to the users of Netherlight to decide on the future of Netherlight?
Well, that's the last question, Vasilis.
Probably, I mean, just on follow up on that, I mean, probably, you know, my question had more to do with business model that you may help commercial entities once they start appearing through this kind of exchange there. I mean, I had in mind the internet exchanges in which there have been business models, not for the exchange itself. The exchange itself, like you said, is neutral. It just makes, you know, money for whatever its cost is, and this is not a problem. The problem is if you start having commercial entities connecting to each other, or even research networks connecting to each other through Lambdas via this exchange, whether there you have a task force or something working and looking into ways of peering or whatever you call interconnection agreements.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that is part of the GLIF working group. The governance working group will, and the middleware, of course, needs to provide the tools. That is looking into these issues. But the model currently is very simple. Every owner of a Lambda is dictating how that Lambda can be used. There are no free Lambdas. Some Lambdas are made available to everyone who is connected at the moment. Some are not. And the repository will give that information. And if a commercial entity joins, of course they have to bring in their own Lambda to an exchange point, and from there they can go to any research user. In our view, any connection that starts or ends in a researcher environment and goes to either a researcher or the commercial is a research connection. So only two commercial endpoints, that is a commercial connection, and there we should be careful with networks and Lambdas in between that are restricted for research use only. But the researcher going to Microsoft or IBM resources via an exchange point, of course, that is, in our view, legitimate research use. But these are, of course, different policies in different networks, and we have to accumulate all these policies in the repository and see what global network results out of that.
Okay, I'm afraid that we are running very much out of time now, so this discussion will need to be continued in the corridors of the conference. Thank you again, Kees, and I'll introduce our next speaker while he comes up and takes over the microphone from Kees. Our next speaker is Greg Cole. Greg Cole serves as the principal investigator, together with Natasha Bolashova, of the NSF program, which is establishing the GLORIAD. And he had the same role for the predecessor, which was called NaukaNet. Greg has co-directed, again with Natasha, the US-Russian Civic Networking Program, which was funded by the Ford and Eurasia Foundations. And he has also directed several other US-Russia infrastructure and community development programs developed by various organizations and companies. But as I said, right now he's very much involved with GLORIAD, and that's what he's going to tell us about in a show with many slides and animations.
This is working. Okay, I have about 78 slides. I'm not going to get through them all. Karel will tell me when to stop, I think, but I've sort of front-loaded the slides with the material that I really want to get through, which is sort of an overview of our GLORIAD program. I'd like to give you a history of the project and also tell you where we're going with this program. And as this slide lists, Natasha Bolashova is my good friend, partner, and also co-PI on the NSF grant, which is part of the international funding that's establishing GLORIAD. This little animation you see up here is something that our Chinese partners put together, which illustrates the ring topology of the GLORIAD network. This is actually depicting the little GLORIAD network, which is the predecessor to the program that we're building right now. And this is being funded from the NSF National Science Foundation with $4.2 million for 5 years, and we just began January of this year. And I want to say that we're part of a family of projects that are funded by the National Science Foundation, have a total of $25 million split over 5 years, so it's $5 million a year, and it's to help, advance, am I still working?
Yeah, you are.
Okay. International R&E network connections.
Put it in your pocket.
Okay. So GLORIAD is one of these projects, the emphasis on U.S., Russia, China, Korea, Netherlands, and Canada. These are the partners with whom we're putting together this network, or this project. Translite Europe is headed by Tom DeFonte and Maxime Brown, who I think Case mentioned in his talk. Translite Pacific Wave, based at the University of California and also University of Washington in Seattle. Transpac 2 is a project. They just recently launched a 10 gig connection connecting Los Angeles with Tokyo, and the WHRN Lila project, U.S. Latin America, and this is headed by Julio, who was here earlier. He's actually at this meeting. And for us, for our part of the project, this is a follow-on to a 6-year program we ran under the National Science Foundation High Performance International Internet Services Program. This is something that we ran with our Russian partners since 1998. The international connections, although you can't see that are in part funded by the National Science Foundation. So the presentation will begin with background, and I'm going to give you some history about the GLORIAD program. We want to talk a little bit about GLORIAD as it exists today and where we're heading over the next 5 years. And I hope I get through the partners and networks, because that's really the emphasis of this program, the different national research and education networks that we're trying to connect and the partners with whom we're doing that. I gave this presentation at a Digital Divide conference that Harvey Newman sponsors in Korea last week, and I think the same because our work for many years has focused on digital divide issues. That's actually what motivated our work between U.S., Russia, and in our local communities. And so one of the divides that we're trying to address digitally is that has existed between the U.S. and Russia for many years. Two countries whose science communities have not enjoyed the benefits that, for example, the U.S. has with broader Europe in cooperating. And so we're basically trying to use networks to encourage broader cooperation between our countries. And throughout our work, we've always had to address local community infrastructure needs, and eventually we got into the business of addressing international infrastructure. So this next slide gives a definition of GLORIAD, and this is a little animation that the National Science Foundation put together a year and a half ago that shows the path of the current network. But the definition is that GLORIAD is an advanced science and education network ring linking scholars, scientists, educators in our partner countries with special network services. It's a pretty small ring today as far as advanced networks go. OC3s and OC12s primarily. We'll bring in our first 10 gig connection this summer to Korea and to Hong Kong, and a 2.5 gig connection to China. So we're already growing a little bit ahead of schedule, where we thought we would be. We hope to have the entire 10 gig ring constructed around roughly this same path that you see listed by the end of 2006, and the idea is to have multiple wavelengths by 2008. And as Case has just mentioned, this is a hybrid circuit and packet switch network. And really it's been our work with Case and with folks like Bill St. Arnaud who have motivated our work on this architecture. And one of the goals of this project is to get our U.S., Russian, and Chinese partners sort of working in sync on this new architecture. The part of GLORIAD that excites me, the part that I really enjoy working on, is the second bullet point there. It's a program to basically encourage broader cooperation between these countries. Again, from the U.S. point of view, we've not had much cooperation for decades with the science and education communities in Russia and in China, and this project is really funded from the U.S. side as an effort to sort of bridge that divide. We are a very proud and happy participant and contributor to the GLIF. Indeed, I think over the next 5 or 10 years, much of what we do with GLORIAD will really be done via services that we acquire from this GLIF partnership or collaboration. So why develop something like GLORIAD? Well, I've already mentioned the first point. It's to leverage this jointly developed and operated network to expand cooperation between countries. The initial emphasis of the project was on U.S., Russia, China. And that reflects the roots of this project in the predecessor U.S., Russia project that we've run since 1998. We added our Chinese partners to that cooperation a couple of years ago. And now we're basically working with people in Korea, Netherlands, and Canada who I think are really leading the charge in developing these this advanced hybrid network model. So we want to support specific applications not supported well by commodity or traditional R&E networks. We want to enable communities to build their own specialized networks for short durations of time, provide a test bed for advanced network research. None of us in this room know where research networking is going to be 5 years from now, so it's very important, I think, that we build in this test bed so that sort of a sandbox that people can play in, and also to encourage compatible complementary infrastructure development in closer step. Some of the special applications, I don't imagine this is news to anyone here, but we're trying to accommodate applications where people need to move, for example, a terabyte of data quickly. You can't do that across our current networks and certainly across our current little GLORIAD network. You need a guaranteed level of capacity for something like a high-definition uncompressed video session. You need carefully managed controlled jitter. You need a privately managed secure network linking people distributed around the globe, or you need to tie together large-scale computing resources. I want to show this slide from Harvey Newman's talk that he gave in South Korea a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure how. Yeah, there we go. This looks at TCP throughput from CERN to different world regions. And one of the reasons that Harvey Newman has been very supportive and helpful in our development of GLORIAD is he sees GLORIAD sort of moving Russia and China infrastructure, or helping to facilitate their move up to this level of some of the other countries in the world. Right now, Russia's on a path up. They're actually sort of catching up, but it's going to take several more years at the current rate of growth. So the idea is that by adopting this new network model, this new architecture, that our partners in Russia and China will sort of be at this same level a little more quickly. That's actually critical for the work that Harvey's doing with the high-energy physics world. So this is from a press release and the former National Science Foundation director's quote here. And I just point this out because there is a real physical and a very practical benefit to this GLORIAD network, but there's also a symbolic benefit in getting particularly the three originating countries, U.S., Russia, China, to agree to jointly build, fund, and operate a common network infrastructure. So the principles that we say motivate our work with GLORIAD: encourage cooperation, advance a common infrastructure, and move control towards the end user. So I'll tell you about GLORIAD, and I always begin with this slide. Steve Goldstein is a wonderful friend of this project. He was my program officer at NSF for many years. I imagine that there are some in this room who know Steve, but we say that our first steps with GLORIAD began in December 1993, and that's when Steve sent a letter to some of our Russian partners basically permitting the first transit of Russian R&E traffic across at that time, the U.S. NSF net. U.S.-China followed shortly after that. So in some sense, we still stand on Steve's shoulders, and I still listen to a lot of good advice from Steve as we develop this project. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the history of GLORIAD. This will take about 5 minutes, and I always debate whether to do this. I'm not sure it's of interest, but I do think it's helpful, and particularly because this is a new group for me to work with. I've never visited a TERENA meeting. We're still sort of getting introduced to the European R&E community, and maybe it's helpful to learn a little bit about why all this activity developed. So it all started for me with an email. This is an email that Natasha Bulashova posted on a Usenet news group back in 1993. At that time, I didn't know Natasha from anybody else. I didn't even know at that time that people from Russia were on the internet. I'd never seen, I don't think, a communications from anyone in Russia. Well, someone in the UK had just answered a problem that I had very similar to the one that Natasha posed, and so I answered her. And that actually started a collaboration that over the next few months motivated our developing something called Friends and Partners. And this is just a hobby. This had nothing to do with what Natasha and I did. Neither of us were network engineers. Neither of us is yet a network engineer. We're still learning. But we decided, based on our own experience, that we wanted people in the U.S. and Russia to learn more about each other. So we developed what would be called now, I think, a community building site. Basically, we hosted websites, list servers, chat rooms. The idea was to encourage people to communicate. Friends and Partners was not a digital dating site. The name we chose has led some people to think that that was our mission. It certainly never was. We have learned that at least one couple got married having met on Friends and Partners, but again, this was not the sort of partnership we'd envisioned. We just wanted people to sort of get to know each other. We started a similar project soon after this one, focused on U.S., China, and Russia, with some people in China, and then a similar project in Romania. And about this time, it was 1995 or 96, we began working on local communications infrastructure. Something called CoreNet in East Tennessee was designed to get our moms and grandmothers on the internet. We ended up with about 8,000 accounts and dial-up services to get folks in our local community on board or on the internet. And then we developed a similar project in Russia that was funded by the Ford Foundation and actually ended up developing and helping operate 6 community networks in 6 cities in Russia. And finally, in 97, 98, we got involved in addressing the high-performance international connectivity. At every step of our progression with our work between U.S. and Russia, we always found we didn't have sufficient bandwidth for what we wanted to do. And so we ended up developing sort of a new part of the project to address that lack. And still, we consider everything we do based on this originating partner called. So again, we met during April 93. We started this Friends and Partners project in January 94. Technical networking, for which neither of us has had any training or background, resulted from our efforts at community networking and the recognition that we never had sufficient bandwidth for what we were trying to do. We basically got into networking because we had to. Our focus has always been on local communications and information infrastructure. And just a little more about the history here. In the early days, when Natasha and I started working together, her set of 7 institutes in Pushna, this is about 100 kilometers south of Moscow, they had a local Ethernet connecting the 7 buildings that housed these institutes, but they all shared a single 19.2K baud modem to Moscow and thus to the outside world. And so bandwidth has been a problem for us literally since 93, 94 when we started on this. We got our first grant from NATO, which enabled us to increase that bandwidth to 256K. I can't believe it, but there was a day when that actually seemed like a lot of bandwidth. We got some equipment donated from various people, and we got a grant from U.S. State Department, and that's basically how we got started. I want to mention in the early days, we had to do a weekly file transfer from UT, where I was located, to Pushna, where Natasha was located, and this is how you had to do file transfers back in 94, 95. The FTP sessions always broke, so you kept your files small. This is literally what I went through every weekend to move this, and it actually took all weekend. With our GLORIAD network, we see transfers like this possible in a minute. Actually, they can happen less. And actually, we see now 4 gig transferred between partner sites in an hour. And this is a look at some data I just generated the other day, which shows the number of data flows greater than 50 megabytes to U.S., to Russia, and to China. We only have data for China for just a little over a year, but we go all the way back to 1999. And you'll see at this point, with our high-speed network, which was at that time 6 megabits, we saw very few data transfers to Russia greater than 50 meg. Well, now we see up to, I guess, 15,000 a month, and to China the number is even greater than that. And these graphs that I show very quickly here just illustrate the speed of the connections. We still have a lot of connections less than 64K, but to the U.S., for flows greater than 50 meg, we're seeing more and more that are moving at higher and higher speeds. And that picture is even more dramatic with Russia, and the scale is actually twice the size. And to China, it's dramatic as well. The scale actually doubles again when we look at the number of flows going to China. So as I've already mentioned, we got involved in a project called Civic Networking, where the emphasis was on developing networks both in East Tennessee, where I was from, and also in Russia, that addressed local infrastructure needs. This was funded by Ford and Eurasia Foundations and still remains an important component of what we do. We still work with these CivNets now on issues related to our GLORIAD network. Okay. So the early beginnings of GLORIAD, mid-1997, this is when we began working on addressing high-performance connectivity, and we applied for funding under an NSF program, and were funded, and we called this project MIRNet. It was funded along with Tom DeFonte's Eurolink and Jim Williams' Transpac project, and the purpose of MIRNet was to connect U.S. and Russia with a dedicated network service. And that actually, at that time, was 6 megabits. Back in '98, we thought that was high performance. And this is an animation which shows data flows. At this time, for various reasons, we really only routed network institutions in Russia sort of west of the Urals, so we don't look at Russia further than that. But in December 2001, we actually began routing traffic, thanks to academician Vilikov, our partner in Russia, with basically all science institutions across Russia. And you see that break point there. That's basically when control of the network went to Dr. Vilikov, and we began working with all Russian science and education institutions. So MIRNet became FastNet and then became NaukaNet. We seem to change our names every couple of years. And this is an animation which shows traffic flows from U.S. to Russia, but also at this time we actually routed European traffic between Russia and Europe. Fortunately, that no longer takes place. Russia and Europe exchange traffic directly in Europe now. And this is our transition time. So as our old program began to draw to a close, these were the motivations for beginning the GLORIAD program. Basically, in 2002, we signed an agreement with our Russian partner, academician Evgeny Vilikov, and our Chinese partner, Dr. Myunhing Zhang, to develop GLORIAD, and the first step was Little GLORIAD. And this is just a brief history of how the Little GLORIAD, from the time we signed an agreement in December 2002 until we launched Little GLORIAD, the network services, Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic, it was just a little over a year. These images here are pictures of the grand opening ceremony that our Chinese partners organized in Beijing, and the rest of this is a history of how we submitted our proposal to the NSF under the IRNC program. We met with Case and his staff in the Netherlands. This was a very important meeting for getting our U.S., Russian, Chinese, Korean partners together. We learned in September of last year we were likely to be funded. We actually moved the project from Washington, D.C., where I lived at the time, to East Tennessee in the summer. And basically, our new grant for GLORIAD began in January 2004. So I'm going to go just a few more slides here and look at GLORIAD today. And this is an animation of traffic flows between U.S., Russia, and China. This is a description of the current circuits that we have available, and this is what we're looking to upgrade. These actually are official. Contracts were signed for the U.S.-China and the U.S.-China-Korea links last week. So this is actually, these are going to come operational this summer. This is a look at our plans for the next 5 years, including a look at the current topology of the network. This will change slightly, but not very much. Actually, the same ring that operates today will operate as we see for 5 years. And this, again, is just another look at the current circuits. You'll see it's a mix of OC3s, OC12s. Canada's donated a gigabit connection to get us from New York to Chicago. And I was going to tell a story about a recent success we had in getting an application from U.S. to China, or U.S. to Russia via China. This is something that happened last week and illustrates the potential of this ring topology. For the first time, we actually got a big application, high energy physics, routed through China between U.S. Russia. At the same time, they routed a similar application from Japan to Russia, to Novosibirsk in Siberia via the China network. So this is a look at our network as we see it next March with the 2 larger circuits, Trans-Pacific. We'll also have our 10 gig connection that our Canadian partners are contributing to get us across North America. And we hope by that time we'll have our 10 gig connection up transatlantic coming into the Netherlight facility in Amsterdam. And that's a look at where we'll be 1 year after that. When the ring, our Russian partners are telling us 2 weeks ago in Korea that they believe they'll have the 10 gig trans-Russia completed over that next year. So the architecture motivation, I think we've already covered some of this. The network design, we basically want to provide our own layer 1 infrastructure so that we can give people their own layer 1 circuits, and we'll run our layer 3 service over one of those layer 1 light paths. We're working with Bill Saint-Arnaud and his people to use UCLP to enable our community and applications to dynamically provision their own circuits. And a big emphasis of our project on monitoring, utilization, performance, and security. We're developing our own distributed network operations center. I've been in China and Korea the last 3 weeks where we've been working on this. We're deploying our own trouble ticketing system integrated with our monitoring systems. This is our governance, the executive board, and about 30, actually probably 35 working groups now dealing with various issues. And I won't go in very deeply to our partners in networks, but I do want to introduce Academician Evgeny Velikov in Russia, as he has been such an important part of our ability to build and run this network. Before we met Dr. Velikov, we actually thought we were going to lose the MIRNet program because we had some problems where we weren't routing enough institutions on the Russian side. Dr. Velikov fixed that problem. He's arranged all this very senior support in Russia, and he's working now with his people with the Russian Backbone Network to provision a wavelength across Russia, and that is no small task. Dr. Velikov, in a very real sense, is a hero for our work with this GLORIAD program. And I guess I really better stop here, but our partners in China, Dr. Zhang, Dr. Yambo Ping, and in Korea, and in the Netherlands, one of those you've just heard from, and also in Canada, and finally in the U.S., a picture of Oak Ridge National Lab, where I basically moved just a few months ago. It's home for me. That's where I actually came from before I left a few years ago. And one word I have to say about Tyco, we could not have built this project without Tyco Global Networks. They have helped us both transatlantic and trans-Pacific, not only with good pricing, but in a lot of other ways as well. And we thank our other commercial partners who we've worked with to build this project. So I think I better stop at that point and be glad to answer any questions. And I'll be here the rest of the day. I'm glad also to talk if there's interest to people before I have to leave tomorrow. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we would have time to take one question from the audience. Is there anybody that we can give the floor to? If not, then I think we should just move on. And now you can hand over the mic to our next speaker, who is Di Davis, and who needs very little introduction because he has already been introduced in the first session this morning. Di has a history in the telecom world, started to work in our community as the leader of the Cosine Project Management Unit, which after a lot of transformation became a company called Dante, where he is one of the general managers still until today. And he's going to give his Dante's views or his personal views on the developments that we've been talking about in this session.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's interesting to look at international activity and listening to the previous talk. It was curious to see a bit of history. It was the case that global connectivity was particularly expensive, and so it was organized in sometimes strange and unusual ways. I think one of the interesting developments as far as Europe is concerned is that now Europe has got a very performant pan-European network today. that has multiple gigabit connectivity really across its entire footprint. And one of the international developments that has taken place has been the extension of that to the east, to Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, all of these areas, now to Russia as well. And so you can see that the European footprint has developed quite significantly over the last several years. And I think in looking at the way one organizes global connectivity, it is important to recognize the regional networks that are in place and to see them as good building blocks for interconnection in a way which is perhaps more coordinated than has historically been the case. Because it was interesting to see Greg wanting to procure transatlantic connectivity to get to Russia, and yet we have connectivity within Europe to get to Russia already. And somehow one of the things that has been an issue and remains an issue is the organizational questions in different parts of the world. As far as Europe is concerned, we have a well-organized set of research networks and organized in a way that they behave essentially as a common group in terms of global connectivity. And I think that model is one that we have been interested in looking at and in developing on a global basis. Because as well as extending European connectivity by extending it to the east and to the south, we also have two regional activities, very much in the area of aid-related developments, but aimed at extending global research networking. I'd start with the Mediterranean region as being an interesting example of what we're doing. The UMed Connect project is about connecting some quite interesting places in the Mediterranean region. And one of the challenges here is actually to get connectivity at all. So this is really about breaking the monopoly of the telecommunications operators. This project is about giving the sort of access which you take routinely in Europe. And that's extremely difficult. When we first started with UMed Connect, we couldn't afford any of the proposals that we received from the telecoms operators. And we had to work very hard to get basically 45 and 155 megabit circuits at affordable prices. Now, this is a battle that we fought in Europe in the mid-1990s, and we're also fighting this battle in the context of the Mediterranean. And interestingly enough, we have now got a commitment from Palestine to want to connect to this network. So there is a political element here, which is a very important political element, about liberalizing markets, about providing connectivity in a much more global frame. And you can see that as far as Europe is concerned, this Mediterranean activity is something that is integrable into the context of GÉANT. So if I look at the next generation of GÉANT, say call it GÉANT 3 for the want of a better name, then you can see that these countries will be an integral part of the European networking scene. And I think that's an important development. It's an important technical development, and it's an important political development, because it means that you can see the European research networking sphere of influence as being something that is well-defined technically, that is well-defined operationally, and that is well-defined commercially. And I think this is one of the achievements which the UMed Connect project has managed to make. It has created a feeling in the North African countries of connectivity to Europe, of the importance of that connectivity, of the importance of research networking. And that's a significant achievement as far as the development of global networking is concerned. A very different perspective you get if you look at Latin America, because the second aid-related project that I want to cover is the ALICE project, which is about interconnection of Latin America and Europe. And one of the main achievements, I think, which ALICE has is produce this network, which you can see in its early form, of connecting the Latin American countries together with one another and also connecting them to Europe. But the main achievement, I think the really significant achievement of ALICE has been the organizational achievement, which has encouraged the Latin American research networking organizations to cooperate with one another, to give them a focus which has enabled them to participate in the building of this network. Whereas before, Latin American research networking was all carried out via Miami, which is a strange sort of concept if you think about it, that a whole region of the world chooses to go to another world region in order to get its international connectivity within that region. And I think if I look at the ALICE initiative and what has been achieved with a combination of Latin American and European money, what you see is an organizational achievement, firstly. Secondly, you see a networking achievement. And thirdly, you also have the connection between Latin America and Europe. And I think this is an important point in terms of the approach that is taken to the development of international connectivity on a global scale. If you look at the European aid-related activities, they've had very significant effect on the development of research networking, both from an organizational point of view and from a technical point of view. Certainly there are significant challenges in terms of digital divide, significant challenges in terms of the sustainability of these initiatives. But I think you can see that by concentrating on regional approach, by concentrating on the development of the European model in a global context, there has been a very, very considerable success in terms of the extension of research networking outside the traditional European sphere. And I think that's a very important development. The fact that in Latin America now you have an organization which encompasses the research networks there, that is an organization of those research networks, is an important difference. It's not a colonial approach, it's a collaborative approach. And I think we can be very proud from a European context of that collaborative approach. I'd like now to turn to the sort of global picture and to concentrate on two other world regions. Firstly, North America. Now, if I look at research networking on a global basis, I think the most complicated place to work with is North America. There are so many organizations related to research networking in North America. The European model just doesn't seem to function there. If you come to Europe, you can talk to a political organization in Europe, and you can get more or less a European view. There may be divergencies in that European view, but you can get more or less a single European view. If I look at the US, then I see quite a challenge. The United States is the only place where Géant has a POP. Now, you might say to yourself, why are we putting technology, European networking technology, into the US? And that is in order to be able to network with the United States. Now, the political organization of research networking on a world scale is obviously a national or a regional matter, but I do think it's interesting that connectivity to the US is a challenging area of development, whereas, for example, connectivity to Latin America, because it is clearly organized there, is relatively straightforward. And connectivity in the Mediterranean region is also straightforward, relatively speaking. The other area I'd like to concentrate on is the area which is shown in blue here, which is the Asia-Pacific region. And again, we have another aid-related project in this area, which is the Trans-Eurasian Information Network. And again, I think this is something where there are real synergies between what is being done in Europe and what is being done in the States. Whether those political synergies are realizable is a challenge, and I think it's a challenge that Greg is seeing various people in the next few days in order to try and determine whether that's a realizable challenge or not. But if I look at the Asian position, I think we have a project which is aimed at connecting a number of Asian countries, the most significant of which is China. But of course, China is really a very, very significant player in research networking today. It's not really a country where you would particularly target aid-related money to, but nevertheless, it's on the list. I think the challenge, again, I see in Asia is the organizational challenge. The organizational challenge in Asia, you have the APAN network, you have the APAN organization, and that's a step forward. But in practice, it is not a coherent organization, and you can find yourself dealing with a number of networking organizations in any particular country. China is an example. Greg is dealing with CSTNet. We're dealing primarily with CERNET. Now, I mean, that in itself is an interesting complication. And I think in practice, if I look at the issue of the development of international connectivity on a global scale, the issue that I see is primarily an organizational issue. There are certainly questions in terms of access to connectivity and access to connectivity at popular prices. But those are political issues that will take a long time to develop. And there are examples that we can take from a European context that show how that can be developed, because these are problems that we faced in Europe and there are problems that we solved in Europe. That's the easy bit. I think the difficult bit is to get the right organizational framework so that you maximize the effectiveness of investment whilst at the same time reflecting the regional differences that very much exist. And the primary challenge that I see in terms of these areas has been the organizational challenge to make this happen. The best example we have of success in terms of that organizational challenge has been the CLARA organization in Latin America. That was a very, very significant development, which was only catalyzed by European money and effort. But that model is one, I think, which is important. It's the model I might actually try and recommend in terms of the North American view of research networking. It's got interesting to see how much you can achieve if you have an organizational structure that is stable and forceful. And we have that in Europe, and I think it's been a great success in terms of European research networking. I think we need to look at how that can be developed globally, because as research becomes more global, we need to have the sort of organizational underpinning of it which maximizes what we get for our money. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Actually, you've been so brief that there's definitely some time left for questions, so who can we give the floor? Up there.
Just wanted to complement to Dai's presentation. Other major effort of Europe, in Southeast Europe, the TERENA network. Also the connectivity in Central Asia, the Caucasus and Eastern European states through the SPONGE and the Vietsch project, as well as new activities to connect Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova.
Okay. That was more a comment than a question. Don Riley.
Kees, I thought you did a really good job of summarizing some very excellent work, and I certainly can't argue with your view of the U.S. But you didn't say much about Africa other than the EU MedConnect project. And going beyond Asia, I think it's even more of a challenge. And we're currently working on trying to leverage NSF money to do something similar to Africa, to West Africa, as some of the IRNC connections. And there are a lot of activities focused on Africa right now, but they really lack, I think, coordination. And I think the opportunity is to do something more challenging, but certainly is significant in Africa if we could find a way to get all these different activities communicating, whether it's World Bank or some of these other activities, in addition to EU MedConnect. And there's this new study that's being done by the Canadians on the, what's it being called, Trans-Arab Networking, something or other, that I'm confused about because I don't know how it overlaps with EU MedConnect. But so I think certainly, I know Heather and I and others have been talking about how to do this, and we look forward to trying to find a way to see if we could work together to do something significant in Africa.
Well, I wasn't sure whether the thread of the question was in
well, I'm not sure it was a question as more as it was simply saying that we've got some big challenges, and that's one that I think there'd be an opportunity to get multilateral. In fact, some of it would be like World Bank and other funding entities that we don't think of as networking organizations, but are looking at funding infrastructure projects like the EC cable and the regional infrastructure project in the east side of Africa. But if they don't link up somehow, like, for example, with EU Med and whatever that the NSF will fund, then they'll just be piecemeal solutions that won't help advance the development we would consider to be NREN type activity in Africa. Even what is an NREN and how do we help advance that concept in Africa seems to be a huge challenge. And I don't know if you've thought about that particular aspect yet.
It was a practical issue in respect of the UMed Connect activity. That the organizations were somewhat vestigial, I suppose it's fair to say, in a number of the countries. And I think the UMed Connect had very much the positive effect of concentrating the organizations there. So from that point of view, the space you can see in the red is Libya, by the way, and obviously Libya was politically not acceptable at the time that the project was put together. Otherwise, you might see some more red in respect of North Africa. The one point I would make is that we do have this connection to South Africa. Yes. I would say that the South Africans fund the entire cost of that connection. And I feel sometimes that politically that's not very good. However, the cost is a political cost. The connection to South Africa, I was told that for an STM1 would be about $1.25 million. And I thought, well, that's not too bad a number, until I discovered that that was the monthly rate of payment for an STM1 to Latin America, whereas I'd assumed it was the annual rate of payment. So you can see why, if you're looking at those sort of numbers, it is very difficult to go in with a shared funding proposition, because that is entirely a political price for the facility. But nevertheless, I think within South Africa there is the organisation, there is the political will to build on the connection to Europe. And I would see, certainly for elements of Southern Africa, that as being a very good model to build on for the further development of African connectivity, both from the point of view of the fact there is a good research networking model in South Africa, and also on the fact that they are interested in global connectivity. And if you're looking for a role model and you're looking for leadership, I think certainly for Southern Africa you can see that in the example of South Africa and the TENET organization.
Any other questions? No, it doesn't seem so. And I'd like to thank Dai again. They're always looking for catchphrases. Always looking for catchphrases from the conference. I remember that more than 30 years ago, when Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State, he was always complaining that there wasn't a single phone number to dial if you wanted to talk to Europe. So you're complaining that there's not a single email address to address when you want to talk to North America. We'll probably solve that in 30 years' time. Thanks also to the other speakers, and it's time for lunch. Thank you.